My name is Ruth McCambridge, and I am the Director of Content here at the Nonprofit Financial Commons. I hope all of you will keep introducing yourselves in the chat so we can see who's in this community. It was a pretty impressive list of about well over 700 registrants who are in this workshop today, in this webinar. And so we hope that you will feel free to answer each other's questions where you know those answers, or comment on each other's questions along with Betsy, who will be answering questions at a couple of different points during the webinar. I want to ask you all to feel free as Betsy is talking today, Betsy Schmidt, who is our main presenter. Betsy will be answering from an expert point of view. A lot of us have had experiences in some of the areas that we'll be talking about, and so we encourage you to get in there and weigh in. Most of us who have been practicing for a while have had the experience of coming up against a law or regulation that it means something to us in terms of the way we operate. Betsy Schmidt is, she's a professor at UMass, and she has recently written a book called Rules of the Road for Nonprofit Leaders. It is being published as we speak, and today you'll have the opportunity later on as we end this session to actually pre-order a copy of Rules of the Road, which I've read and I think is fabulous, and I'm a harsh critic. It will be 30% off. This is a kind of a limited offer for the people who are coming to this webinar. I want to talk for a second about why we're doing this. Nonprofit Financial Commons is really focused primarily on nonprofit finances. So why would we do a webinar on legal issues, the legal landscape that we're experiencing? There is a very intimate connection between our resource environment and our legal environment. And I think all of us know that, although it's not always entirely obvious before we really experience the effects of it. But I do want to talk a little bit about this particular environment that we're in, and I'm going to talk a little bit longer than we would usually at the beginning of one of these sessions, because we want to make clear that there is a very strong relationship between the legal environment and the financial environment. So the so-called legal landscape that nonprofits are experiencing right now is being wielded to produce a sense of disequilibrium and fear. If that's where you feel yourself to be, it's hardly surprising, but the creation of that state of being is in fact at least a significant part of the overall intention right now. It's not that we are seeing a wide swath of new laws yet, but we are feeling the significant and sometimes fatal financial effects of being barraged with threats of defunding, of actually being defunded, and legal action, especially if we refuse to comply with edicts that may, in fact, in the long run, be found by the courts to be unlawful or unconstitutional. The most direct effects are being felt, to no one's surprise, by organizations that are anathema to this administration's stated priorities and belief systems. These organizations very often have their original roots in movements that sought to change unjust laws on behalf of people who had been marginalized. And that is our legacy that we must live into even now. Not living into those legacies have costs of their own, significant costs that can be measured in loss of credibility among our constituency and our mobilizing capacity to resist unjust laws and a return to legal states that we think are essentially, um, create injustices in a wide manner. Also, all of this is the credibility that we have as a result of our being able to clearly state what our missions are and why our missions are the way they are, those value statements, is what creates credibility and a sense of bonding between us and our constituents. It's a very important source of currency. It's convertible into cash in a million different ways. And we've talked about that before. We'll talk about it again in the financial commons. Despite the potential financial losses posed by this landscape, this webinar is being presented to encourage you to resist getting stuck in defensive mode. This is not a defensive, a protective risk management webinar. It's a webinar to think about how do we take a stance with regards to legal challenges. Remember that our best protection is in each other, the national, state, field associations that are bringing suit and providing guidance to individual nonprofits are your best friends and resources right now, along with national and civil rights organizations. And I want to just for a moment, just pay a little bit of tribute to one organization that really stood out over this last month in terms of the way they responded to a pretty significant legal challenge, and that's the Vera Institute for Justice, which basically was invaded by Doge until they kind of warded them off at the door. But Nicholas Turner, who leads the Vera Institute for Justice, says, the advice that I would have is if Doge were to come knocking on the door of any nonprofit, that is independent and receives federal funding or not, that there is a litigation strategy. There are resources that are available. Democracy Forward, the ACLU, and others have been preparing for exactly this eventuality. And from me, take heart. We faced these kinds of moments before. It's incredibly important that we band together and that we resist any reversion to a more unjust state of our democracy. With all of that, I want to introduce Betsy Schmidt, who I have known for too long to really say. And she's the author of this much anticipated book, but she also has a huge amount of experience in just watching the way nonprofit law is made and is wielded and considered. You can ask her just about any question. I don't want to say we challenge you to stump her because she would hate that, but feel free to ask her whatever. I do want to also present the moderators. Can we go? Okay. Our moderators today are Wade Rogers, who's a CPA, North Carolina, and Mark Hager, who lives right around the corner from me here in Houston. And they will be fielding your questions. So as you put your questions in, oh, someone says you guys are a handsome pair. I agree. But as you put your questions in, they're going to be the ones that are going to be sorting through them and deciding which ones to ask of Betsy. So in advance, thank you very much for your thoughtful work on that, Mark and Wade. With that, I think I'm going to go to a poll that we're going to do very quickly. And the poll questions are these. if you worry about that the current political environment may lead you to legal issues for the nonprofit you work with, what specific legal concerns do you most anticipate or fear? And if you'll just answer these, and you can answer, you can check more than one of these if you want to, but we just want to have a sense of what it is that people are thinking might come their way.
And we'll just give people a few more seconds to answer. Okay.
Okay. Oh, it looks, this is interesting, Betsy. We've talked so much about this. People are very worried about challenges to their tax exemption, first and foremost. Then new laws that outlaw or criminalize their work at the federal level, which I have to say is a good call because we're seeing a lot of that that's already gone on. Next is challenges based on a lack of compliance. Also a very good call. We always have to be worried about that when we're in a more kind of hostile political environment. Um, and then new laws that outlaws or criminalize our work at the state level, not so much. It may be we have a lot of blue states in the room, but there are some states in which that's much more a present worry than others. And then other, and I imagine people have gone ahead and written in their worries in the chat. But with that, Betsy, that kind of lays the groundwork for you. And Betsy's going to address all of that and more. We've worked very hard on this webinar to keep it out of the area of just fear mongering and, oh my God, we have to be so careful. For us, this is a matter of, what are you willing to stand for? Both negative and positive, and then how to take that stance in a way that really does, to the greatest extent, protect you and your organization. Betsy, on to you.
Hi, well, welcome everyone, and thanks for the introduction. I'm looking forward to this and looking forward to your questions. We certainly do live in turbulent times. It must feel like we have a hurricane upon us. I certainly don't want anyone to underestimate the headwinds that are against us, but we also shouldn't underestimate the nonprofit sector. So we're witnessing, I think, two things that are making it feel particularly turbulent. One is an effort to shrink our civic space. And the second are it's economic uncertainty. So we really, as nonprofits, we're more used to the economic uncertainty, but it's never, never easy. Despite all this hand wringing about the rule of law, we need to remember that we still have it and we can use it to achieve our missions. And this is in many ways a wake-up call. We've been getting a little complacent, kind of living in our house of sticks, and we can now use this as an opportunity to build a house of bricks. And so we'll be doing everything at about a 20,000 foot level today because we've only got an hour and a half and we've already used up part of it. And it's also, I'd like to stress that this isn't legal advice. It's just legal education. So I'm going to start with the basics because in times of stress, we always want to go back to the basics. That's what really helps us. And then we'll talk about what has, I guess I will start with what has shifted. Talk about the basics, and then 3 or 4, I think it's 4 special things that have changed since January that we will address. And then the final section, we'll be talking about general things that we can do to shore ourselves up. So I did think we should start with what's shifted in the last 5 months. Certainly the rhetoric has shifted. And so has the policy. Pretty much the policies that the Biden administration wanted are out of favor, and the Trump policies are in favor. But the rhetoric, I was just looking at the order that the Department of Homeland Security had when they discussed, when they said that they were taking away Harvard's right to have foreign students. The headline was Harvard University loses student in exchange visitor program certification for pro-terrorist conduct. So we're beginning to see nonprofits called terrorist organizations. And actually, we've seen it for a few years when talking about nonprofits serving immigrants. And then that particular document also said, let this serve as a warning to all universities and academic institutions across the country. So they're, pretty obvious about, no, we do want to frighten you about this. So the rhetoric has definitely changed. The policy has changed. So has the federal funding. I mean, that's what has really thrown, obviously, many nonprofits. This has been done mostly through executive orders, which there have been 152 as of May 20th. And this is the most that any president has ever done. This chart on the right is comparing Bush, Obama, Trump in the first term, and Biden with this second term. Trump is very close to what he did in the entire first 4 years of executive orders. There have been over 242 lawsuits as of May 20th. And the Vera Institute, which Ruth mentioned, was a plaintiff in a suit that came after that. So there have been many more since then, too, I assume. Most of these lawsuits are being stopped. There have been more than 200 court orders stopping actions in 128 cases. Only about 43 have been allowed to go ahead, had been allowed to go ahead. This is May 1st. But they hadn't ruled on the majority of cases. So, and so far, in almost all the cases, the Trump administration is complying. I think part of that is the goal is not necessarily to win these lawsuits. The goal is to shake everything up. But so we need to remember the basic law has not changed. So can we have the next slide? So these are the 8 points I make in my book. I feel like I don't just feel, I know nonprofit law is written in very convoluted language, and it's usually written in negative language. So you're told in about 6 knots what you can't do, which is really hard for activists who are trying to do something. So I tried to recast the words, and the number one thing is to keep your mission front and center. If you can keep your mission in line, you are going to be following your charitable purpose under the federal law, so you'll keep your tax exemption. The state also can and does regulate your organizations, and most of you will have a purpose in your articles of incorporation. But the purpose, that's your mission. Lawyers might quibble over if it is exactly your mission, but it is. It's why you are there. So as long as you focus on that, use your governance wisely. This is a time for the boards to be involved, and be smart about protecting this mission and protecting the people you serve. Fill the coffers. You are always thinking about the money. That is something to consider. You don't want to go out of business, and you don't want to break the laws trying to fill the coffers. Numbers 4 and 5, I'm not going to talk about today because they're the rules if you're actually doing business, or the rules that try to prevent you from swindling people. And I'm assuming that there's no one on this webinar who would do that. I will encourage you to advocate for your cause. We're allowed to do that. And it's a very, very important part of securing our mission and completing the paperwork, because that, as Ruth mentioned, is a very, very important part of particularly when you're being watched carefully. You just want to be sure that you're doing things correctly. Someone asked about an easy guide that they could take and then kind of put it aside. I did, I created a couple of handouts that I think will come to you after this webinar. And one of them, which I'm forgetting, anyway, has kind of a list of paperwork that you might need to follow. The other one has some websites and blogs that you might want to look at. My final one is knowing when to change course or throw in the towel legally. Some of you may be facing this as times change. So we won't talk too much about that but we can talk about it strategically. But just remember, you have these tools, particularly if you follow your mission, pay attention to your finances, pay attention to governing the organization well, and follow the paperwork. Just do your job. You should be able to get through this. So I think that's what we're going to do before the first Q&A.
Great, thanks, Betsy. Y'all haven't met me before. I'm Wade Rogers. I'm one of the moderators with the Nonprofit Financial Commons and have been accumulating questions, some of them coming in through the chat and others when you registered. You had the chance to ask what was on your mind. I think there's a really interesting framing question in a way, and I can't tell if it's a question I should ask right at the beginning or at the end or at both points. But essentially, I'm going to ask the question verbatim. Do you think nonprofit organizations will become non-existent based on the current political agendas? Sort of, is this the existential moment for the sector?
That's a great question. It's almost an existential moment. It's certainly a moment to pay attention to. This is, even if you're working for an organization that is as apolitical as possible, we should be paying attention to what's happening now. The system is being shaken up. Nonprofits will probably never go out of business. Certainly our missions and the people we serve are going to be there no matter what happens. No matter how authoritarian a government becomes, they still want a nonprofit sector to handle some of the things that they don't want to handle. I learned this fall that China, for example, they don't allow advocacy organizations. That you couldn't have an organization that's trying to change the government, but they have a lot of nonprofits for humanitarian reasons, including nonprofits that bring school lunches. So in some ways, we're more socialistic than China because our government does the school lunches.
That's an interesting comparison there, and I think the answer to the question is going to start to come greater into focus as well as we go through the webinar. On your list of those items that need to be considered, one of those was govern wisely, and had actually a few questions in the registration regarding board liability with respect to these issues. Thinking about enhancing D&O coverage. And documenting board decisions if these decisions are made in the face of community or political pushback. But as board members, what types of liability issues do you think might be opening up in this?
Well, I would make sure you've got the D&O insurance, and make sure if you get sued or something is happening, you notify them immediately so they don't have an excuse to say, oh, you didn't tell us. Generally, board members are not they're very rarely personally liable for something. You do have a fiduciary duty to the mission, to the finances. It's the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and in some states, the duty of obedience to the mission. So you really want to be paying attention. It is extraordinarily rare for a board member who violates the duty of care to have any personal liability. The duty of loyalty is basically putting your finger in the cookie jar. So if you take money from your organization, yeah, you will have to repay it, and with interest, and pay penalties, and maybe go to jail. So I wouldn't advise that. The only thing, and there, I saw in the questions ahead of time, there was one of this, as a board, you do want to make sure the withholding taxes are paid, and because that's the one area where the IRS can come after you individually. But for the most part, if you're doing your job, you're going to be okay. And in making these difficult decisions, which we'll be talking about in the next section, yes, you want to document them. You don't want to document too much. If you're going to be investigated, you want just enough language in there to protect yourself, and not so much that they can take something out of context. So that's actually quite a skill, but I think most people have an inherent idea of how to do that.
That's right. The art of minute taking, where you know, there's a point in the discussion where that's not really necessarily going to be part of the minutes, or it is. And you're right. It's a fine line between what's documented and not. A few that just came in the chat that I don't want to forget about. Jennifer asked, we've received a grant from the EU, and so there's international work going on here. Any concerns on that end that maybe an organization needs to be proactively thinking about?
Yeah, I have done nothing with international things. I did see that there was a somebody
Right.
tech soup on this call. Maybe they could answer it. But I do think you have to report it on your Form 990.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
again, I don't know the answer to that. So I did get stumped.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. And I think that clearly there's the issue of, you know, what you just touched on in the first part of or Ruth touched on about that definition of supporting terrorism that could obviously be interpreted.
Yeah. For the most part, getting a grant from the EU is not going to be considered supporting terrorism.
Exactly. And I think this may be coming up, but I want to make sure it's asked from Mark about any efforts to eliminate or ignore the Johnson Amendment, or the status is on that.
Well, the Republicans have said that they want to get rid of it again, but there's been no movement towards it. So first of all, let me back up and say what the Johnson Amendment is. It's the amendment that says that nonprofits cannot endorse or oppose a political candidate. And it's been somewhat controversial, particularly on the right, because some evangelical ministers have loudly proclaimed that they'd like to endorse a candidate. That hasn't kept, there have also been pastors or people of faith endorsing people on the left. They just haven't made such a big deal out of this part of the 501c3 is violating their rights. It's not popular. It's something like 80–90% of pastors still want to be able to, you know, don't want to have to, not that you would have to endorse a candidate, you never would have to, but they actually like this restriction because they're worried about, you know, people saying, well, if you say from the pulpit that you'll endorse X, Y, Z, then I'll give you $1 million. And that doesn't have to be just from the pulpit. That could be from any nonprofit. So it's one of the reasons why it hasn't made traction lately. And I don't see, it's not being pushed right now. You never know. These things, it's certainly been bandied about.
Right. And piggybacking on our discussion about documenting board decisions in minutes, Denise brings in about using AI note-taking now for meetings. Any concern there? In terms of, I think that really for the note-taking for meetings may be differentiated from formal minutes that are documented in governance records.
Yes, I know that some nonprofits have gotten scared enough that they are asking people to, if you're taking notes, then destroy them, and we'll only have the ones that are documented. I wouldn't, at this point, have AI do my minutes. It's not that hard to do it with people, and you'd have to check them out anyway. But
Yeah, and thanks, Michael, for that comment. No one will, regarding the question about the existential moment, no one will actually advocate for banning the sector. I think
Yeah,
that's in the light of your answer as well, Betsy.
yeah, I think what is happening now is, which could, well, it's definitely going to happen, but the sector will shrink in part because there's going to be less federal funding, right? But there's also an effort to make some politically disfavored organizations either have their life be so miserable that they go out of business, or stop their ability to act as a 501c3. So some organizations may end up reorganizing that way, but so far that is not happening. There's just language like, oh, we're going to take away your exemption, but it isn't happening.
Right. Okay. That is all we have on the questions at the moment. I think a lot of the other questions that have come in are going to be addressed in your upcoming slides. So we'll be
Great.
back in a little bit with some more Q&A.
Great. Thanks. So I thought I'd address 4 areas that have been big and in the news and confusing, and they overlap. But the very first day we got of the second Trump administration, we got a couple of executive orders making it clear that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is disfavored. These basically, it's almost always talked about as illegal DEI, and so far it's not illegal, except that there was a Supreme Court case saying that Harvard can't use affirmative action in its admissions. So these executive orders have been challenged in court. There's a nationwide injunction against parts of them. But there's still issues because it's tied to the purse string, and it's tied to if you have federal money, and I'll talk when we're talking about the contracts, but they're really disfavoring organizations that have diversity, that either have it as their mission or as a policy. So if you have federal money, and we'll talk about that in the next section, that may be a different idea, but if you don't get federal money, you can do as you please. Now, some organizations are still, as we've seen, it's been highly publicized, some of the major for-profit companies have dropped, like Meta, have dropped their DEI policies. There will be nonprofits that feel that they need to do that too, but that is not something that has to be done legally. It would be something that you would decide to do strategically. So, there's a lot of non-legal ideas that have to come into your decision making, but it is still legal to do this. And there have been a few other cases. There's a group of, it was the group that sued Harvard, which is Students Against Fair Admission. And now there's one, and somebody in the group will remember the name better than I, American Alliance. I wrote it down somewhere. Let's see if I wrote it in here. Anyway, AA something, who are bringing lawsuits, private lawsuits, trying to go after organizations that are giving favor to minorities or people of color or LGBTQ organizations. They almost succeeded in the 11th Circuit in a case that a Black investment women, they were giving grants to Black women entrepreneurs. And the 11th Circuit said that was likely going to be illegal and put an injunction on it, but it was never decided at the even at the final level for the 11th Circuit, much less the rest of the United States. So the trend may be going towards some problems here, but the law has not changed at this point. So those of you who have DEI in your mission, you still can do it. You can advance equity and diversity. We still have basic civil rights protections. You can serve diverse communities. If you're really, out there, you may be examined more closely. So that's when you're going to want to be very, very careful. Document things more carefully. Be careful about how you communicate about your work, and really consider all the risks. But once again, this is focus on your mission, focus on how it will affect you financially, and you should be able to handle making decisions about this. Somebody asked, if I keep doing my mission, will I be safe? We can't guarantee that anyone that they'll be safe, but for the most part, they can't go after every single organization. You go after somebody like Harvard, you get your attention, and then you get the fear of other people. So the rest of you can just do the best you can. I did notice that a lot of the shareholders of these major corporations are voting in DEI policies. So Apple has done it, Costco has done it, evidently Walmart, Kroger. So DEI is still quite popular, evidently, in the world. So we don't have to be that scared. And another thing to think about is, if you have been given a grant to someone, for DEI purposes, and then you drop that program, you've got a problem, because you've promised a donor you'll use the proceeds in a certain way. So you'll need to be talking to probably talk to a lawyer before you do that. Okay, I'll go on to the next one. So we also have a lot of questions about grants and contracts. I'll start with ones that have been can be or are being or have been terminated, and then go to, because a lot of people who are still applying for organizations are being asked to certify that they won't be involved in illegal DEI. So if you're worried about a grant being terminated, or if you've been notified that it will be, make sure you review the contracts, the terms, because they will tell you the reasons that a contract can be terminated. They can all be terminated if you don't do what you said you would do. There's always been a question, not a question, but you're never guaranteed your second or third year. And there are some places where they really could, if it's no longer advancing the United States interest. So that's the language that you've seen the Trump administration use. But these people who are suing now, saying that their grants have been terminated illegally, are often saying they were terminated for reasons that were not in our contracts. Or they could be because the government hasn't followed its own procedures. They have procedures they have to follow. You do too, so you have to be very careful. You're going to follow the procedures for using your funds. If you've still got some and you're still able to use them, you're usually allowed some closeout costs, so you're going to want to read that very carefully, figure that out very carefully. There are administrative remedies. So you will be allowed to appeal within whatever agency it is that is ending your contract. You want to be sure that you watch the timelines, because if you miss a timeline, you might not make it. And then, there are, as Ruth mentioned, there are often organizations like Democracy Now! Taking on these big lawsuits for, if you're losing a contract, so are a lot of other people. I have a friend here in Massachusetts who they lost a housing grant. At first they were, I mean, they still, I'm sure, are panicked, but someone else picked up the lawsuit. They didn't have to pay all the funds for that lawsuit, and there was an injunction placed, so at least temporarily they have their money. And another thing, never forget that you can if you're losing these funds, please let your representatives know, because eventually, you know, this is happening in every single state and district, and congressional leaders don't want their economies to tank. And we keep forgetting how important the nonprofit sector is. It really is important. Okay, next slide. So there's also these certification requirements, and I had the opportunity to read them the other day, and they're kind of chilling. And they must be, you know, I'm not involved in an organization that has to make this decision, but it has to be a very, very difficult decision. It's not clear whether these requirements, certainly the government can put conditions on grants and contracts. The question is whether this particular one is stopping First Amendment rights. So there is litigation on it, but it's not, you know, nothing has, it's going to take years for all of these, at least months, but probably years for these issues to be determined finally in the courts. And by that time, you know, a lot of organizations, the damage will have been done. And so I would definitely talk to an attorney about before signing this. I would in both cases, you have a grant manager or a program officer within the government that you can talk to. Remember that the people who work in these administrative agencies are still career employees who are there to help facilitate these things. They're not necessarily, or I shouldn't say necessarily, they're not political appointees at the level that you'd probably be working with. A lot of them have been fired, so it's going to be harder to get to people, but there are people that are still career government employees working for it. And you should also go and look at all of your materials to make sure that if there's, you know, you're not, if you sign something like this, you're telling the truth. Because, I mean, you never want to lie anyway, but there's the False Claims Act is a strange act that we sometimes call a bounty hunter act, where private individuals can come and say that you've made a materially false statement, but you have to know that the statement was false, or deliberately ignore or disregard evidence of the falsity of the statement. I can't imagine any well-meaning organization, you know, making a materially false statement that's reckless or, you know, knowingly false. So you should be safe against a False Claims Act, but the possibilities of, you know, having to defend a lawsuit, this again is why you have directors and officers insurance, can be quite high. So again, you're going to have to look at your mission, your values, and your, actually, I think this is the next slide, and your risk tolerance. So yeah. So these difficult decisions, like whether you're going to sign one of these certifications, whether you're going to continue with your DEI, is be guided by your mission. Always consider all of your stakeholders, because it's not just the federal government, right? And also, one of the things that makes it so difficult in these cases is we don't quite know what the federal government wants. It's kind of like negotiating with a bully, where you know, Columbia did one thing and then they get asked for more. So you have to think of that as something you're balancing as well. Some people, if they give in will lose donors, and other people, if they don't give in, will lose, not people, organizations will lose donors. So you think that through, but you also always want to do what's best for the people that you're serving and for your mission. And then only your organization knows how comfortable you are with risks. And so, some organizations are more comfortable with others. If you're a small organization, the chances of your getting the attention of the federal government is pretty slim, unless you do something so outrageous it gets in the news. So get to the next slide. People are also worried about the loss of exemption. And so there've been lots of rumors going around. Certainly, President Trump has threatened Harvard with loss of exemption. By the way, there's a statute that says it's a criminal offense for someone in the administration to ask the IRS to investigate someone or to tell the IRS to stop an investigation. So it's he actually kind of even backed it up and suggested that if there was an investigation, it was already ongoing at that time, which may have been the case because the IRS keeps it secret. They're not allowed to tell you. I mean, they're allowed to tell you if you're being investigated, but they're not allowed to tell the rest of us that they're investigating someone. There were rumors that there was going to be an executive order wiping out whole swaths of nonprofits. That has not happened. And probably the reasons these haven't happened is there really are procedures that you have to go through. If you want to revoke someone's exemption, you go through a huge process of, an audit back and forth. If they finally do decide to revoke your exemption, you have a chance to appeal it administratively, and then a chance to sue. The case that's brought up occasionally, I don't think this applies to Harvard, but Bob Jones University did lose its exemption in the 80s for racist behavior. And that took about 10 years to get through the courts. And so nobody's going to lose their exemption overnight. There's a real process for this. You could lose it by having the administration change some of the rules. But even that, if you're changing a rule, you have to have notice and a right to comment. And the courts are not giving deference to those rules anymore. So that's not, so far we haven't been seeing a lot of rulemaking. Congress can, of course, legislate changes. They could say no universities could ever be exempt anymore. That we have not seen, except making life difficult for universities, which, frankly, making life financially difficult, as you all know, those of you who are following this nonprofit financial commons, if you take away somebody's money, it doesn't really matter whether they have exemption or not. But they haven't done that yet. The new bill hasn't said anything about taking whole swaths of exemptions away. There was in the House bill for a while, a threat to immediately, without much due process, take away organizations that are considered terrorist. There's actually already a provision that's very similar to that. And the reason it hasn't created much angst in the past is terrorism had a much more narrow definition than it seems to under this administration, but that was taken out of the bill. So for right now, well, let's go to the next slide. Because should you prepare for loss of exemption? Yes, of course you should, because you should always be prepared for an audit or an investigation. But I don't think the chances are very high for most organizations that they're going to be audited and go through this whole process. But as long as you're focusing on your mission and your finances and your governance and completing your paperwork, you should be okay. If you get an IRS inquiry, it's not loss of exemption. There's a lot of ways to go. But those of you, because we really want to be protecting ourselves and the whole sector, we should be watching these bills and acting if there's something that we, advocating if there's something we like or dislike in those bills. Next slide. So the last thing to talk about is this big, beautiful bill. And really all I'm going to say is it's going to change before it gets passed, so there's not a whole lot to talk about it. But on this slide, you can see there's some tweaks to charitable deductions, some taxes on endowments, foundations, and excess compensation. I don't know if those will stay in. I do know that there are provisions that are affecting nonprofits in particular areas, like Medicaid and SNAP cuts, funds for deportation, leasing of federal lands. I don't remember why I said check affiliate groups, but I think why I said that was if there's your affiliate groups, for example, if you're a housing organization, they're going to be able to tell you what's in that bill that you should be watching for. So that's a lot in just a short amount of time, and we probably have a bunch of questions about those things.
Yes, you do. The chat has been very lively. Thank you, everyone, for putting your questions up. I think Ruth is going to join us, for this round of Q&A. Hi, Ruth. Let me get started. Questions in the registration as well as chat about what do organizations need to do to make sure they have appropriate legal help? Another question was, are there free legal resources we could turn to? I wonder if y'all have a
I want to make it clear that I'm only answering from the point of view of somebody who has run organizations and been through many mills, being sued and being defunded for political beliefs and you name it. Over these many decades, I have been through it, and many cases we had to avail ourselves of legal help. And I just want to say, on a very practical level, nonprofits have got to pay attention to their networks and what information is filtering through their networks about potential threats. You very often will get a heads up a while before something actually presents itself as a legal threat. And what should be happening in the in the time between when you first are hearing about it and when it actually presents itself legally is that you begin to develop a collective suit, a class suit, or you find a group of other organizations who have similar problems in some way, and you try to, as much as possible, do whatever legal work that you have to do on those kinds of systemically generated threats together. If you try to do them separately, it's way more costly. We know that, and for a lot of nonprofit organizations, the worst kind of legal threats are the ones that really actually cost us a lot in legal fees. And so making sure that we understand where are suits being brought, what national and local groups of lawyers are there kind of presenting themselves to be used for civic or civil rights applications, and just begin your conversations with those people. Understand that a lot of that support is available, and the more you support that kind of support happening in legal realms, the more there's going to be of it, because it really is a partnership. It always turns out to be a partnership when you're suing to kind of restrain the government from doing something that would create havoc in your mission area. I do want to say also, though, that there are, I think, checking in with legal resources in your area or legal friends is a really important thing for nonprofits to be doing right now. We know there's going to be various challenges. We don't know how close to home it's going to hit. And so making sure that we're kind of making those connections, and most of all, keeping our relationships up in our networks is just incredibly important.
Can I add, you also though need to be aware so that, there are these political ones, but there can also be, even if it's politically motivated, going after you for something that you've done wrong. And
Right.
so, again, I suppose that's getting the local people. You do want to make sure you find a lawyer who understands nonprofit law. Not just because they're a lawyer does not mean they understand this law. Finding somebody ahead of time so that you're prepared is a good idea. Some of the immigration people have been very, very prepared for this. And now, occasionally when people are going to their immigration meetings, they're coming with their lawyers. And there's a guy in Vermont who was saved from going to Louisiana because he was that well prepared. The organization that was the nonprofit that was helping him and the lawyers were there when he was taken away. So they were able to get a restraining order before he was sent to Louisiana. So this being prepared in advance is a good idea. But there's always, I think, paying attention to legal things is a good idea, and it's also worth paying for. You're going to pay for your rent and your electricity, so it's worth paying for lawyers sometimes too. Somebody asked about a checklist. There are some checklists that you can look at online. One of our handouts is a very, very reduced or one-page list of some of the forms that you're going to need to be remembered to file.
A few questions from the chat that just came in the last section, Betsy. Now that there have been new regulations distributed by the EEOC, aren't all employers required to comply to the DEI executive order language? That's something.
Oh gosh, okay. So I'm also not an employment lawyer. I'm doing the 501c3 and state charity things, but I do know that the language in general has been so vague that nobody knows what it means. So I think that's a problem. I do think whoever asked that question, that's a really good question, because employment law is always an area where you're vulnerable if you're a big enough organization. Well, probably even if you're a small organization, but certainly a big organization. So you're going to want to be very careful about doing things correctly. And I was actually on a webinar the other day where they were talking about this and saying, there are ways. Talk to a lawyer. Is basically what they were saying.
And thank you, Cora and Michael, for putting some links in the chat that may be helpful resources in that question. Another question in the chat: we're applying for a DOJ grant for a prevention education program that works in public schools. Staff teach equitable relationships and use all the illegal DEI in quotes. If someone complains, calls the hotline, will the staff have any legal exposure, or does that fall back on the organization?
I would assume it goes to the organization. That's too specific a question for me to know the answer to. That's one that you have to ask individually.
Great. And compliance. Any discussion on compliance issues, how they occur, and what to do to immunize against these issues?
Yeah, I want to talk to that. It's really when I've seen organizations that have gotten themselves into a position where the administration is unfriendly to them, as often as they get straight on the kinds of challenges that the administration has been posing to whole fields of organizations right now, they also get pulled up on compliance issues. And I will, just a heads up that even if there's a piece of what you are required to do that you have never been asked to prove, you want to be ready to prove it at this point. You don't, especially if you are not in good stead with the powers that be, you have to be sure that every I is dotted and every T is crossed. This may be hard for some organizations right now who, in part, because the compliance is costly and compliance is not everybody is always caught up on their compliance. I was talking to an auditor the other day who said everybody at this point should be audit ready all the time. So it's not a matter of just getting ready before there's going to be a review. People need to be ready to answer compliance questions at any point. And so that ability to be squeaky clean, to keep the proper records, to make sure that your board minutes are up to date and that everything is reflected properly in those minutes, and that you don't have a lot of extraneous nonsense in there, but you do have the important decisions that authorize action. All of those things are going to be so important to your ability to kind of protect the organization. I've seen a lot of organizations just go under, because of nonsensical compliance issues. When they've gotten into the crosshairs of an administration, whether it's a state or federal. So I do think, I know that audits are actually getting more and more difficult to get at this point, but every organization should be thinking about what compliance issues might we be called on, and how do we keep that stuff up to date in a way so that we're completely above reproach.
Yeah, there's actually a question in the chat as well, just that the current environment, should organizations be moving more quickly towards having an audit earlier in its growth cycle? And that, part of that answer would be, should always be ready for it, whether or not you have a financial statement audited or not.
They're expensive. So it depends on where you are in the organization.
Exactly.
They are expensive, and we're going to be doing a session on audits out for nonprofit financial comments next month, but they have become more and more expensive, and become harder and harder to engage. So if you can get ahead of that, get ahead of it, because it's not something you should wait on. You should be sure that you have that engagement made, so that you don't put yourself in any kind of hot water.
Thanks. I've been a terrible timekeeper and I've gone over, so I need to let Betsy go back to the material.
Great, thank you.
We'll see you in a bit for more questions.
So I just am going to end with a section on the general steps you can take. And I actually have a whole long list of them, but I thought I'd start with the one on advocating, because that's the one that has the most legal questions. I've got a whole chapter in the book called Advocate for Your Cause. But you're really also advocating for your beneficiaries and advocating for the sector. So in the next section, or the next slide, I talk about what we mean by advocating. Can we turn that? Yeah, we go. So you can do a lot. And this, the picture on the left is what the National Council of Foundations is suggesting our message should be, how important nonprofits are. And they've been doing, by the way, excellent work. And I recommend you look at their site to help keep you up on what's happening, as with your state association of nonprofits. They can be very helpful. But this is only a partial list of all the things you can do to advocate. You can lobby. Over and over, nonprofits think they can't. Lobbying is very narrowly defined as talking to a legislator about a specific piece of legislation, or encouraging the public to talk to the legislature about a specific piece of legislation. But you can do that. You just can't spend it's about approximately 20% of your budget. It's less if but not much, it gets down to maybe 15-16% until $1 million is the most you can spend on lobbying. But if you're that big an organization, you can also create a 501c4 organization that's affiliated with you that can do unlimited lobbying. So there's plenty of lobbying that you can do. But you can also educate the legislators on your issues. You can talk to them about the need for environmental legislation in general. You can talk to them about the need for clean air. You can talk to them about the need for prison reform. So there's a lot that you can do. Nonpartisan voter guides, advocate for better regulations, because regulations are not legislatively done. You can write white papers and op-eds, engage in community organizing. If the legislature asks you to testify, that's not considered lobbying. Litigation isn't considered lobbying. Telling your congressman or congresswoman that you've lost funding is not lobbying. And you can even argue for fair enforcement of laws. The only things you can't do, which is the next slide, yeah, there you go, is endorse or oppose a candidate or spend too much money on lobbying. So there's really a lot we can do, and we do encourage you to do it. Other steps you can take, we suggest you try not to comply in advance. Some people feel that they need to do that, and I am not going to tell an organization not to do that. But for the purposes of having some kind of solidarity as a sector, if we can not comply in advance, it would help. And the way to do that, really sit down and know what your values are and what your risk tolerance is. Review your website and social media, document destruction policy. Check all of your policies. But the reason I put down a document destruction policy is those who are worried about being caught having said something stupid or that will be taken the wrong way. There's certain documents you have to keep for a certain amount of time. Make sure you do that, right? But some organizations now are actually saying after X amount of time, everything else will be destroyed. So make sure you take careful minutes, but whether you say enough, but not too much. Lots and lots of planning can help. Doing a grants risk assessment, scenario planning. Think of 6 or 7 scenarios. That may be too many, but if you're prepared for a situation, it's much better. Same with the crisis planning. And by the way, you need a crisis plan for every kind of crisis. It's not just the government coming after you. It could also be a natural disaster. There are several things, but if you know ahead of time, if this happens, here's who's going to be making the decisions, here's who has to be notified, here's the lawyer we will contact, that can really help. And I'm encouraging that we have a radical imagination. This is, as we know, every challenge is also an opportunity. The nonprofit sector was never perfect. Your organization wasn't perfect. This is a time to go, wait a sec, there may be a way that we can use this challenge to come out better at the end of this, and in a way that we're serving our constituents better. As Ruth has been emphasizing, find your allies. The state councils of nonprofits or people who have an affinity with your cause, and then advocate for your cause. So I'd like to finish with some words of encouragement. I think that's on the next slide. We are the resilient and innovative sector. I often think about this quote from Walter Lippmann, that the way, it was done like in the 1910 or something, the way in which the world is imagined determines at any particular moment what humans will do. We have to stop imagining the worst, because by imagining the worst, we're going to create the worst. So I really encourage people to have the radical imagination that I mentioned a few minutes ago. The picture of this slide is a picture of a ranch of the photographer Sebastião Salgado, who died last week. He was a photographer who documented genocide and all sorts of just awful, awful things. And he was so broken by 2001. He'd lived abroad, had lived in Paris and, documented wars all over the world. Oh my gosh, sorry. This phone is going to ring and I don't have anybody here to stop it. So sorry. He was so discouraged that he went back to Brazil, and that's the one on the left is the ranch that he'd grown up on. That had been there was just nothing left. And climate change and neglect and no water had made it horrible. And he and his wife planted 20 million trees, and it's now this beautiful park. And so from the depths of despair come good things. And so I just want to also repeat the words of Native American activist Winona LaDuke. It's our privilege to be people of the moment when things must change. Thanks.
Thanks, Betsy. And I think Ruth may be joining us again as well. Thanks, Sherry. Plan for the worst, then manifest the best. That was very helpful. The chat is busy. I wanted to throw out some more questions that came in. One of them, I think this is a quick clarification on one of the previous slides. What do you mean by nonpartisan voter guides? Would you just have a better description about that?
Yes, you can talk about here is an issue and here's what the 6 candidates say about that issue. So you wouldn't say, and we like the way this candidate thinks. You'd be nonpartisan that way.
Great, thanks. Also in the chat, any idea on how our sector should respond to nonprofits which are stealing money and in the news every week? So we do hear, frequent news stories about misappropriations and embezzlements. And what about those not in the news and how that's reflecting on our sector and public perception?
That's interesting. Yeah, it's every one of those embezzlement type things makes the entire sector look bad. And you just want to say that's so infrequent. And what also happens, in my opinion, is each time, particularly if it's a big organization like the United Way, in 20 years ago, 25 years ago, longer, 30 years ago, geez. Anyway, a long time ago, there's a big scandal at the United Way. It created, what happens is legislators go in and go, oh, we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. And then they make it worse for the rest of us. So it just the law gets more complicated and more difficult to follow. And so I think education, make sure you have 2 people signing checks that are large, right? Don't let the treasurer also be the one who signs every check and also be the one who does the audit, and just be careful. And the ones who aren't in the news, that's a really interesting question. I think that's why the National Council of Nonprofits is trying to explain to people, we are the invisible backbone. You don't always see us, but we're there. I heard somebody say the other day, this speech is for everyone who works for, supports, or uses a nonprofit organization. That's all of us. So we got to get that message out.
I think, I think this is such an important question because in the end, I've so often, well, it used to be more common than it is now, is people would kind of resent our regulators in the sector, is that they would get upset when the regulators would call nonprofits on bad behavior, on making claims that weren't true, which was happening in a lot of kind of international charities. And even the stuff in Minnesota, which someone brought up in the chat, those are incredibly destructive of the trust that actually authorizes our state of being. You know, nonprofits function through the trust of the people that they represent and they serve and that they work with. If as a sector, you know, that is brought into question by a couple of organizations in the area, and it's not really common that people purposefully violate trust, then it actually creates a much bigger ripple effect for the rest of us, and also authorizes, you know, sometimes it will initiate overly corrective legislation, which kind of just you know, requires over compliance and those kinds of things. What that means to me is that we have to, as colleagues in the sector, we have to call each other on this stuff. We can't wait for regulators to call it, and we can't complain when regulators do go after somebody. Yeah, the Red Cross thing was amazing. It was just like it was horrific. But when you think about that, and then you also can think at the same time, because one of the things that I think is interesting in this period of time is that people are being asked to sign away their adherence to values. Like they're not supposed to talk about that their program has a gender-based ideology in it. Well, hello, you know, I've been a feminist my whole life, and I'm not sure what to do with that, because I basically operate with a gender directed ideology. I mean, that's what it is. So when that happens, a lot of other people that I work with and for over the years have also operated in that same mindset. It's what bonds us together. It's what makes us do things in common. If I walk away from that, like say Susan G. Komen did when they decided to you know, kind of violate the belief systems of a good part of their constituency, it is going to hurt you. You are going to lose support. So it may be that we're being pushed by government to stop declaring ourselves as what we truly are. But if we stop declaring ourselves as what we truly are, then we may actually be losing a lot more than we would lose from government, because we're losing our resilience and our you know, our basic protections, which are in our constituents. So I know this isn't a legal point, but it's something that over time I've learned that very often when you think about, well, I'm going to lose this bit of federal money if I don't do this thing that people want me to do, that if you do that thing, you might actually find yourself in a worse pickle, because you have really no constituency to fall back on, and that's your life's blood, and your information systems and your everything. So it kind of depends where you think you're authorized from, and what you think it is that drives and enlivens you. Is it federal money? Is it you know, is it your constituents and their need for you to be in a particular place for them? And those are the complexities that boards are faced with at this point. And I don't feel, you know, it's certainly not easy. I think when I look out and you see these violence against women's programs, the rape crisis programs, the programs serving you know, serving domestic violence victims. I hate using those words because I'm still adhering to a gender-based ideology on all of this. That what you see is, you see a kind of a weakening of our interpretation of things, and then that leaves us a little bit more isolated because people don't have anything that they can hold on to with us. So that was a long answer to a short question, which is you know, just because something is a legal challenge doesn't make it more important than other considerations in your organization.
There's another thought I had about the people who are actually stealing and stealing. They're not always stealing, but they're often using the charitable funds for personal goods, which, I mean, you can call it stealing or not. But in this political environment, and when people don't trust the government, it becomes quite dangerous. I've seen two big scandals. One was the National Rifle Association. The head guy, the National Rifle Association, was abusing, not just him, so was the CFO, several of the people were abusing the charitable funds. And because people didn't trust the state of New York, or they were saying this is politically motivated. And in that case, it's gone to so many courts. Even if it was politically motivated, I believe that that was happening. No, it also happened in 2008 with a left-leaning group, Acorn, where the brother of the founder had embezzled $1 million, and they kept it a secret even from the board until a whistleblower told the story. So, and one of the reasons they kept it a secret was they were afraid that their politics would be hurt if it came. Well, yeah, they would be. But we have to be honest, and we have to build trust back up in the government so that people believe that this actually did happen.
Thanks. I have a question that did come in the chat just recently. And I know that this outside of the notion of funds recapture on federal grants, but any ideas, or has anybody heard anything about the government requesting grants that were paid to be returned or paid back? The actual money has already moved across.
Well, there's certainly all of the money that was promised,
Right.
that was then frozen. And in some cases it was frozen permanently, in some cases it was frozen or delayed temporarily, but in most cases causing serious problems. The stuff that was, that was frozen permanently, the government actually went into the banks where the money was being held and basically stopped any payments of the money that had essentially already been promised. I'm going to bring something up, talking again about, I just want to make a clear statement about legitimacy. If people will remember, there was a huge scandal around the Build the Wall charity that was a part of the first Trump administration. I don't know if you remember all of that, but it was about the most sordid, ridiculous thing. It was like a Carl Hiaasen novel, if anybody's a big fan of Carl Hiaasen. But then there was the scandal in the Trump Foundation itself, which occurred right before he was elected the first time. There's a way in which we have to understand that he has survived both of these things apparently, and we can
Yeah.
be righteous and survive these things as well.
I wonder if you could make one last, for the folks who are asking about it, one last description of Betsy's book, the title, and how they can get it.
I want to say something about this. I read Betsy's book and I was like, God bless her, because she called everything out exactly as you experience it as a nonprofit leader. It's like a lot of these laws feel like they're vague. They're so open to interpretation. You're never quite sure what you need to do in relationship to them and when you're in danger. And she does a wonderful job of just saying, calm down. There's a way to approach this that is much more empowered. And in my opinion, every nonprofit leader, manager should have this on their desk. It's a great reference volume. It is called Rules of the Road for Nonprofit Leaders. And it's being, I don't even know at what point it will be available, but you can order it today and with a 30% discount. It's a truly wonderful book. Yes, there you go.
Thank you.